Good morning. I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily video update for August 13th, 2024. I'm going to just cover two things today because we're dealing with a situation which is veering out of control. The hotspots are heating up, and they're being heated up by the foolish idiocy of leaders in the West who are going all out to try to preserve their collapsing unipolar order. And what this means is they're targeting those countries that are moving away from the dollar system, moving away from the control of the City of London and Wall Street, and moving towards national sovereignty and allying with nations with similar desires to break from the control of the hegemonic power of the empire. And the empire is the City of London and Wall Street. So I'm just going to review these two hotspots because it will indicate to you both how serious the situation is, but how insane the establishment is in the West and why we need to have a growing, powerful peace movement to counter them. Now let's start with the media coverage of what's going on now in Russia. There was an attack into Russia by Ukrainian forces in the Kursk region. And what we're seeing is a cheerleading from the Western media and from Western establishment, cheering on the Ukrainian attack inside Russian territory. For example, the New York Times reports that it has, quote, unsettled the Kremlin, unquote. And there are other reports that are, and some of these reports are mixed and not entirely valid. It's hard to know really what's going on other than the fact that Ukraine did break through Russian lines. They did get into Russian territory, some say 50, 70 kilometers into Russian territory, and they're fighting. So more importantly, they're targeting the nuclear plant in that region. Now, this is significant because yesterday there were drone strikes that set fires in the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant that's in the Donbas region. Now, Zelensky said Russia was firing at the nuclear plant. But this, of course, is absurd. This is the old Ukrainian line. There are Russians in the plant, Russians running the plant. Why would they fire at their own people? So the point here is that instead of covering this as a brilliant assault by the Ukrainians, a proof that Ukraine is still able to fight, instead of cheerleading that, they should be asking the question, how crazy is it to shoot drones at nuclear power plants? What's the intent of going into Russia? The U.S. is obviously backing this. The U.S. is sending more weapons, more money. And so we're seeing an escalation at a point at which the Russians are saying enough is enough. They want a negotiation. They want to have mutual security agreement. But if this continues, Putin said yesterday, there will be no consideration for Ukraine. Now, of course, the West has said Putin never cared about Ukraine anyway. But it's this kind of coverage and this kind of language which is putting us on a course toward a U.S.-Russia war between two nuclear superpowers. Now, at the same time, you have the situation in Gaza and Southwest Asia, where Biden yesterday spoke with leaders of the UK, France, Germany, and Italy. And he told them that they need to make an effort with him to de-escalate tensions and to broker a ceasefire deal. Now, we've heard this from Biden for quite a while. The problem is that Netanyahu doesn't want a ceasefire. He doesn't want a truce. He doesn't want peace. He will only stay in power as long as there's a war. So Biden, speaking with these leaders, they issued a joint statement expressing, quote, support for a truce, unquote. Well, where have these leaders been while there's genocide being carried out, slaughtering of Palestinians, starving them, driving them out of their land, and meanwhile sabotaging efforts at resolution. And when I say sabotaging efforts, Netanyahu refuses to negotiate a truce, a ceasefire, a trade of hostages, because Netanyahu wants the war, as do the members of the U.S. Congress who cheered Netanyahu when he spoke before them on July 24th. And what difference will it make to issue a joint statement by these leaders who have done nothing to stop Israel from carrying out the slaughter in Gaza? The fact is, these leaders are complicit in genocide, including Biden. Biden has been more than complicit. He's been a war criminal, aiding Netanyahu's war crimes against the Palestinian people. You want to stop the fighting? Stop the arms flow. Stop the money from going in. Instead, U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin announced yesterday an expanded buildup in the Eastern Mediterranean and in the region as a whole, including bringing in the USS Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group. Now, with the attack going on inside Russia, which everyone sees as a NATO attack, and the approval, by not doing anything to stop it, of Israeli genocide against the Palestinian people, not just in Gaza, but in the West Bank as well. The question is, how do we get out of these situations without an expanded war that could become nuclear? There's only one way: honest, serious negotiations, where each side begins by recognizing legitimate security concerns of the other. Unless you have that, you have no basis for peace. Once you have that, then you can begin the process of reconstructing Ukraine. You can begin the process of rebuilding Gaza, but only when there's a recognition that there are legitimate security interests that must be taken into account on each side. Putin is ready for this. The West is not, in terms of Ukraine, because they want Ukraine to continue being a wrecking ball, knocking down Russia. That's what this is about. As far as the Gaza situation, the unwillingness to challenge Netanyahu is actually the definition of complicity in war crimes. So in both of these situations, what's required? More pressure from the population. And I mean real pressure, marches, demonstrations, protests, which demand an end to this policy of unleashing military actions in defense of a collapsing empire. And that's what we're dealing with here, a collapsing empire. I've covered this repeatedly. It's on our blog page, LaRoucheOrganization.com. You can find all the material you need there. What you can't find is your courage to take these ideas out and fight for them. And that's what's needed now. That's the most important thing that's needed, is populations in the United States and in Europe to step forward and insist that these wars must stop and that the effort at a negotiated settlement should move to peaceful cooperation for mutual benefit. If you don't have that, you're going to have more war, and eventually, whether by accident or intentionally, you will have nuclear war, and that will be the end of the human race. So I'll be linking the video from the last meeting of the International Peace Coalition. Watch the dialogue. It was extraordinary discussion, including Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson, Dennis Kucinich, Ray McGovern, Helga Zepp-LaRouche, and others. Think about it and figure out what you can do to make sure we can win this war. And by winning this war, I mean the war against the oligarchy and the war hawks.